How do you see the future of American Jewry, and more specifically, what do you see as the primary dangers and challenges that lie ahead?
Is that part one? Or that's the whole question. This is, it's obviously a very difficult and complex question, and one that we think about all the time. But, Jews, when we look to the future, we first look to the past, because if we're not rooted in our past, we're not going to be able to meet the challenges of the future. And this is really unique to Judaism, and the way we approach history is experience history. And, Winston Churchill once said, the further back you look, the further ahead you will see. Our sages said it 1,000 years earlier. So looking to the future means that we have to look at where we are, where we came from, how we got here, and how do we come to a different conclusion. For me, it's not a question of survival. The question is thriving. How do we have thriving Jewish communities under the circumstances that obtain? The world is shrinking. The Jewish world is shrinking even more. And it's not just in terms of numbers. Globalization has made the world a much smaller place. It means everything is integrated. All problems, all issues are interrelated, domestic and international, and certainly between international issues. When I came to New York to start the Soviet Jewry organization, it was a big issue to deal with the Soviet Empire. But you didn't have to think of the ramifications in Malaysia, Indonesia. Today you have to look at all the ramifications, the economic interrelationships, the political interrelationships, which makes the issues much more complex for us. And therefore, many people want to avoid them because it all looks so difficult and so overwhelming. And the truth is today we face issues of great complexity, but also great seriousness. The Jews were the first global people. Benjamin Metudella, long before Marco Polo, went around the world, and we have whole industries, the diamond industry, other things that grew up because of the interrelationship of Jews as a global nation, as a people with connections. And we consider all the four corners of the world in all our prayers as coming together because Jews are a people, the international Jewish community, which some people then misinterpret as a conspiracy because they don't understand why we feel what we feel for Jews very distant when they don't have comparable sentiments. So I think the situation first is that we have to focus our resources and to look at the issues realistically. There are contradictory trends. I won't go into all of it now. But diaspora life is by and large good, certainly in the United States, which means that assimilation is easier, intermarriage, a lot of the problems that we face are because life is better. The barriers came down, and also Jews can opt out. And it means also opting out in terms of a concern with the issues. The biggest problem we face is indifference. Moshe Rabbeinu taught us in the mitzvah of Hakel that the greatest danger to the Jewish people is not external enemies or natural disasters, it's apathy, indifference, and ignorance. Those are the things that we could not overcome. And we see increasingly the indifference towards Israel, towards other issues. It's not antagonism, it's not what some people have been writing about the young people being against Israel. It is not true. We've done very extensive studies, the biggest study ever done of the American people, every segment, Jews and non-Jews, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, young, old. And what we found is that properly presented, Israel gains support. People want to be supportive of Israel. And if you ask them in a poll, 2/3 say they do, unlike many of the other countries that you come from and know about. Jewish demography is also a challenge. We have fewer babies. We have an older population, disproportionately old population, which means that more of the resources of our community are going to be focused meeting the needs of the elderly old rather than on the young and meeting the educational needs. Because a simple answer taught throughout Jewish history is education. It's why Judaism made it the first priority, that even before a synagogue, you have to build a school, and the collective responsibility for educations of communities towards every student, even where the parents don't provide it, you have a collective responsibility to provide it. When the Greeks and the Romans limited it to the elites, Judaism said it has to be universal. So we know that what the answer is. The question is the nature of the Jewish education, how we reach the young people. The changing demographies also of the countries in which we live will impact all of us. You know, we have in America, 40% of the births are Hispanic children. In Europe, you know that 40% are Muslim children. These are all going to have sociological impacts. We're living in a vastly changing world. But the Catholic Church had it right when they said, give us the child till he's 6, you can have him the rest of their lives. We do not. We take our children for granted. We do not educate them. We send them on birthright at 18, but ignore them the first 18 years of their lives and expect Israel to save them. Israel does do a good job. It does open their eyes. But then they go to a campus unprepared and fall victim to the trends. And it brings me to the issue which I think is really the key, and you raised, Stephen, and that is delegitimization. Nobody knows what it means. Israelis cannot pronounce it. So we have to come up with a different term than delegitimization, but we know its impact. It is a global phenomenon. It impacts every sector of society, unions, churches, academic, cultural, every sector. It is not about policies. It's not about where the border should be or settlements. This is not about 67, it's about 47. It's about Israel's right to exist. But it's not just about Israel. It's about the Jewish people. And it's about the Jewish people's right, but it's not politically correct to say I hate Jews. In most places, some it is, but you can't say I hate Israel, and certainly that I hate Zionists. And we failed this generation because we let Zionism become a pejorative term. That should not be tolerated and has to be turned around. I know we have limited time, so I just want to raise a few points. The truth about delegitimization is it's our fault. We raise the bar on what we tolerate. We have to draw the line and say no more. We're not going to allow Israel to be presented with the lies and distortions and misrepresentations that is so common in the press and that we see increasingly evidenced. Martin Luther King once said, we won't be judged by the attacks of our enemies, but by the silence of our friends. We are our friends. We are the friends of Israel, and we in the diaspora have to stand up, and we have created all sorts of new mechanisms. We have here today groups from Africa leading the central bankers of Africa. We have movie stars. We are bringing people all the time to address those audiences, to turn around the image. When the study shows that if you give people the truth about Israel, Israel's strongest weapon is the truth. And you can take them to see anything you want. They all go back and saying, this is not the country I expected. And young Jews have to be told because they're being fed the lies as well. But when they hear a black movie actor tell them, guys, you don't know what Israel really is, it turns them around. And we have to learn to go to them and to do stuff. You know, you have Al Jazeera, Al Manara, Al Hura pounding the minds of young Jews. But we don't have no Al Shapiro going there and telling them, hey, this is the real truth, what's going on. And it's time that we start getting into the 21st century, that we have to use the new methodology. Everybody accuses us of controlling the media. Why shouldn't we do it? The truth is that young Jews are intimidated. Older Jews are intimidated. On many campuses we hear that young Jews don't sign in on their religion, don't want to sign up for Judaic studies. Christian students are not intimidated. Jewish students are. And they are afraid to stand up. And when they have to pass through checkpoints on the campuses, of their campuses, it becomes very difficult. So we have to tell Israel's story in the diaspora. It is not the total solution. We have to build strong communities. We have to build the infrastructure of communities. But Israel today is a partner with us in this. It's no more the patronizing, look what we did for Israel in the 50s and 60s. It's what Israel is doing for us. It's saving our children. And we have to today give them an understanding and build common approaches because the problems are universal. And that means Europe, the United States, Israel together have to globalize the solution to global problems. Certainly there's a difference in degree, but not in the challenge. To me, we were able to anticipate delegitimization because I looked at the British example. That was the model for America, and we were ahead of it because we learned from them and about the nature of the problem. We have to fight 21st century challenges, 21st century wars with 21st century weapons. We have to try and challenge and meet the challenges of the Jewish people utilizing the 21st century's innovations and solutions.
Thank you, Malcolm. You're always so very eloquent that it's hard to cut you off, but we do want to give the panelists a chance to speak, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So from the large to the small, Rachel Corpus, you are the leader of one of the smallest Jewish communities struggling in the world. Maybe struggling is too harsh a word, but tell us about your community.
Thank you, Steve. First of all, I acknowledge my wonderful members on the panel here, and it's an honour to be amongst you. Just a little personal introduction. As I said, my name is Rachel. I'm 38 years old. I am a mother with 2 children, and in my public life, I run a business. In my private life, I run a non-profit organisation called the Zionist Federation of New Zealand, and I'm a product of a great Zionist youth movement called Hub Draw. I've been on the executive for 10 years of the Zionist Federation, and I've been the president for 4 years. And I think I can claim I'm the youngest president ever in this role. So I bring something new to the table.
Rachel, just move a little bit away from the microphone because we're hearing you.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. First, before I go into the details of the challenges of living in the diaspora in a remote community, I really wanted to take the chance on behalf of the New Zealand community to thank the State of Israel, the World Zionist Organisation, the Jewish Agency for the support given to the New Zealand community. Your support in the past and continued support in the future has been a defining factor of Jewish continuity in New Zealand. So thank you, Israel. New Zealand is a nation of pioneers. During the early 1800s, many of British immigrants came with nothing to a land that was empty and full of wild bush. Whatever they could carry is what they had to start a life in a new country. With the pioneering spirit still exists today. There is a concept called the number 8 wire concept for New Zealanders, and for the New Zealanders in the room, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Number 8 wire is used to build anything and fix everything. And I believe the same creative spirit exists here in Israel, to build a country piece by piece out of nothing or out of number 8 wire. And that is what we continue to do in our New Zealand community. We're fortunate to live in a country founded on democratic and egalitarian principles. In fact, New Zealand was the first country in the world to give women the vote. But looking towards the Jewish community, or my community, it is not a new community. We are over 6 generations in New Zealand, and the first families arrived in the first wave of immigrants in the early 18th century. Zionist activity has been alive and kicking for over 100 years in New Zealand. Recently, I found a document of receipts of a donation that members of the early Jewish community sent to the JNF in 1911 for £7.5, sent to the Kekal for their mission. So our history is long and strong, and we're very proud of it. But let's fast forward. The population is between 10 to 15,000 Jews spread over 2 islands. The largest is in Auckland, which is the city that I live in. There are 2 Jewish day schools or elementary schools, and there are no Jewish high schools. And this is a challenge that I hope that I will be able to explore later in our discussion. And there are 2 strong, active, very proud and active Zionist youth movements. And many of the graduates of those youth movements have made Aliyah, and some of them are in the room today. We have progressive and orthodox shuls in Auckland, Wellington, and in the South Island. And as I hope some of you know, the South Island, after the massive Christchurch earthquake, is a very special story for us now, and I also hope that I get to share some of that story later in the panel. We are small, yet we are strong. We are remote, which makes us very creative. The young leads the old, because we have no choice. There are many challenges to live in the diaspora. But first, I really want to unpack the word diaspora. The diaspora for me, for my community, is a loaded word. My diaspora, my New Zealand diaspora, is not the diaspora of my mates in Sydney or Melbourne, or perhaps the people around me in this panel. So yes, we are all labelled as Jews living in the diaspora, but our experiences and challenges are different and diverse. As an introduction, I want to share with you, from my experience as the leader of a Jewish community in the diaspora, 3 main points that I would like to focus on today. First of all, our remoteness. my friends, the next step after New Zealand is Antarctica. We live very, very far away. It takes 2.5 days to get here, and you wake up 2.5 days later. So when you talk about remoteness, I get it. Our isolation brings a whole set of challenges that I could talk at length on, and that is a very, very key point, and that's why I put it first. Our size is a challenge and sometimes a double-edged sword. On a good day, we are 15,000 Jews plus Israelis. And the Israeli population is growing. And that is a whole discussion in itself. We have no critical mass, which, by the way, does not make us any less critical in the Jewish world. However, it is challenging to find a Jewish voice locally, outside of our community, within the government space, within general community space, and also internationally. So our size is our second biggest challenge. Third, creating sustainable and effective leadership to maintain Jewish identity and continuity for our community. In other words, the birds like to leave the nest. And it is such a huge challenge to maintain the Jewish leadership in the community, because that is our future. That is what will keep us alive. That is the future of our Jewish continuity. And we're doing some really creative, amazing projects to invest in that leadership. And I also hope I get the chance to share that with you today. So in summary, what I bring to this table is real experience at what I call the coalface of the most remote community, and we work extremely hard. Everyone is a volunteer. I'm a volunteer. Every Jew in this room who's from New Zealand, who I love, I know deeply and personally, is a volunteer. No one is paid to work in our community. So the work we do comes from a very special, deep place. And I also hope that I get to share more of that with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.